Today I'm going to be doing a little tutorial on how to use a formula called VLOOKUP. And VLOOKUP is a formula that I use regularly for collating data in Excel. So when some new data is being collected and I want to basically store, collate and store that data against the animal's records. So I've got an example today of a client who has conducted some fat and muscle scanning on their stud lambs, and I'm going to collate that data against all the previous data recorded on those animals to be able to submit that to sheep genetics. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open side by side the main database file that has all the animals' information in it, and then the new session file that has been collected. So what I've got is this is the new data that's been collected for the animals. And you'll see if I just freeze the top row there, as I scroll through, you can see there's quite a bit of data that's been collected there on 400 on animals. We've got the EID tags, the date of measurement, and then we've got the weight, the fat and the eye muscle depth of this carcass data. The second file I'm going to show you is this one here, which I've extracted from my software, and I've just hidden some of the traits that aren't, some of the columns that aren't relevant, but essentially we've got the EID of the animals, and then some headings for where we're potentially going to store this new scanning data. So what I'm going to do is open those side by side. So if I go to arrange them vertically, I like to have both my files open side by side, or you could have them open on different screens on your computer if you've got multiple screens, just for the ease of transferring the data across. So with VLOOKUP, the first thing we need to make sure we've got is a common ID field between these two files. So in this example, we've got the EIDs of the animals because that's what the scanner has recorded electronically against the EIDs of the animals. Sometimes you might have data recorded against a visual ID, but in this case, we've got EID recorded against both the animals. So what you need to do before you start doing the VLOOKUP formula is make sure that you've got a common ID field between our two files. And you also generally want that ID column to be to the left-hand side of your data. So the next step is in our main database file where we're wanting to add this new information. I want to add in, for the first instance, add in some new trait headings just so we can copy the data across. So what do we want to copy across? I want to copy across these 4 columns. So I'll just copy for now and paste them in. And you can see I've got a filter across the top here. So filters, you've got to be really careful with them. I found it's the main source of scrambling data is by having filters and not having them across all the rows. So make sure you've got a filter in your first column, a filter in your last column, and everywhere in between. Otherwise, if you're unsure or you're just not very confident, you can remove that filter while you're doing the exercise and then put it on again later. So just be very careful with filters is my take-home message there. So we've added in these 4 new columns to our main database file. And now we want to copy across this information for these animals. So this is where VLOOKUP comes in handy because you don't have to copy and paste animal information one at a time. So what you do is you go into your main database, and for the first animal, start in the first column that you're wanting to transfer, and you put in an equals sign. Whenever you're doing a formula, you always start with an equals sign, and then we want to find VLOOKUP. So you simply start typing in VLOOKUP, and it will find it. Double click on VLOOKUP, and it opens the formula for you. Now you can see that there are 4 components that we need to include for our VLOOKUP. So we'll just go through them one at a time. So the VLOOKUP value is the first, and this is essentially asking us for the animal ID that we're wanting to search for. So for this first animal, the animal ID is in this cell here, the first EID tag. So that's the value. We're going to be looking that animal up and looking in our our new session file to find the information. So simply select the cell with the first EID, and then we want to put a comma, and now it's going to go on to the second variable of this formula, and that's the table array. Now the table array is actually asking us for the scope of data where we're going to be looking up this information from. So this is actually in our second worksheet. It's not in our master file, it's in our session file. So for the table array, we go across to our session file and we start with the first column, or it should be the column that has the ID of the animal in it. And we want to select that first EID, and then we want to go across. I'm going to encompass all the columns. Just this will save us a little bit of time with our formula. I'm going to go all the way across to the last column that we're wanting to copy across, and then all the way down. So this is a full table of potential source of data that we're going to look up this animal in. So you simply select and just let go with your mouse, and you can see it fills in the array of information. So this is the book that's located in, and anything between A2 and E428. Now we can put a comma in again. Now the next variable we're looking for, you can see we're looking for a column index number. So the column index number is which column out of that table that we selected. So we selected 5 different columns, A, B, C, D, and E. Which column is this date variable going to be in? So date is in the second column. So we put a 2 and put a comma. And then we always select false. I'm not sure why, but we always select false. Double click on false. Now you can close the bracket and just press the enter button to complete that formula. Don't worry about the fact we've got an NA value in there. I'll explain what that means later. But if we click back into that cell, just so we can see the formula pop up, what we've entered is we're looking up animal A2, the first EID within this table array, and we want to return, for this date column, we want to return the value that's in the second column across from the EID. So what we want to do now is copy that formula across so we can save a bit of time, and rather than having 4 separate VLOOKUP formulas, we can sort of do them all at once. So before we copy that across, there's one important step, and that is to lock in that EID column so it stays there. So essentially you just put a $sign in front of the A2, and we'll see what happens now when you go back into it, and just on the bottom right-hand corner of the cell, you'll see a little cross appears, and that allows you to click and drag and drop. And what you'll see if you click in the first one and then scroll across to the second, third, and fourth, is the formula will stay exactly the same, and the A2 is locked. If you don't lock it in, it'll actually change, and you'll be looking up a different value. So now what we've got to do is alter. So if we go into the second column where we were looking for the weight, we've just got to alter this column number here, because we obviously don't want to look for the variable that's in the second column anymore. We will now want to look for the variable that's in the third column, because weight's in the third column. So we change that to a 3. And then we go across to fat. We'll change fat to a 4. And we'll go across to eye muscle. We'll change eye muscle to a 5. So now we're going to return 4 different values at the same time. So now is the opportunity or the time to really put that formula all the way down. So highlight those 4 columns, and then again, select the little cross at the bottom, and you can drag all the way to the bottom. This is going to copy the formula for all those animals. And what you'll see now is got a bit of scattering of some cells. Some animals have got values and some don't. Okay, so usually when I've done a VLOOKUP, one of the first things I'll do is get rid of these formulas to lock that data in. But there is one additional thing I'm just going to explain briefly, and that is what happens when in our session file, when we've got some cells that don't have data in them. So there might be some that are blank. In this case, with carcass scanning, animals that are under 30 kilos don't have a fat and muscle measured. So they're blank cells essentially. And what happens in a VLOOKUP is if that cell is blank, it will return a value of 0 and it'll give you a 0 value for fat and muscle, which isn't actually a true value. It's simply indicating that the cell is blank. And the complicating factor here, and it's not an issue with fat and muscle because it's impossible to have values of 0. But for some traits, like imagine pregnancy scanning, 0 is a legitimate value. So what we want to do in certain cases is to make sure that there's no confusion between returning a value of 0. What does that mean? Is it actually a value of 0 or is it simply a blank cell? So to be on the safe side, what you can do is if you just select that whole area that we're looking up and then just add in anything that's blank, find blank cells, and I replace them with an X, replace them all with an X. So anything that's now blank, we'll put an X into our lookup. So I can be confident then that if it's got an X, it's actually a blank cell, it's not a 0. So that's an important step I generally do now. And now that we've done that, we can actually, it's a good idea to get rid of those formulas straight away. So if you highlight those 4 columns, right-click copy, right-click and paste the second option, paste values. And what you'll see now when you click in those cells is we've just got the values. We don't have that formula anymore. And that means that I can close this file or edit this session file and it's not going to change or lose the formulas or change the values in here. So they're locked and loaded. I'm going to put that filter across the top because it's easier to tidy up things with a filter. So just highlight the whole row and filter, and then we can be sure we're not going to scramble something. So the first thing I notice is the dates are looking a little bit weird. So simply highlight the date column, go home, and then change it from a general to a short date. Now you can see we've got some nice dates there. And then we can order by any trait. It doesn't really matter. And we'll get all the animals that have been measured to the top. You'll see there's a couple of X's that pop up in there. There were a few animals. So it's easy for us to do a search for the X's and get rid of them. And anything that gives us an NA value, NA basically means that this EID tag we were looking up, it does not exist in that session file. So if I copy and then do a search, it won't be in there, it doesn't exist. So that's what NA means. NA means that EID did not exist in that file. So all that data, there's no data there. All these animals that have returned a value, they were in that file. Let's now get rid of those X's and just replace them with a blank cell. So that, you know, in the case of preg scanning, will transfer across correctly, zeros versus blank cells. And then the final step I like to do when I've done a VLOOKUP is just to check that the number of records, including the heading, I've got 401 rows with data I've transferred. So that obviously is 400 animals. Does that match how many animals are in that session? I can see actually, if we take the heading off, there's 427 animals in that session. So there's 27 animals that are in this session that haven't transferred across into my main database. So that's, you know, something you need to pay attention to. Sometimes retagging will happen. New EIDs have been assigned to animals at some stage, but they're not existing in our main database. So I do what I call a reverse lookup. I don't know if there is a more technical term for that, but I do what I call a reverse lookup. So to identify those records that haven't transferred. So I actually go into my session file and I'm going to do a VLOOKUP in here. And I'm going to look up this animal and see, does it exist in this, this main database? So I can just scroll to the top and then, you know, encompass all the potential EIDs in my master file. And I just need to select, obviously, the scope of that first column. So that's my table. I'm looking in the first column. and then false. Double click on false. And this is going to tell me, yes, this animal did exist in my master file. So that data has been transferred. Remember, you've got to put your little dollar sign in before you copy it down. And now I can copy this formula to the bottom. So double click is a quick way of getting that formula to go to the bottom. Just scroll and make sure it has gone all the way to the bottom. Fantastic. I'll get rid of the formula, copy, paste special. Now if I sort by that column G, all these animals here, and there should be 400 of them, have transferred across. Fantastic. Correct, 401, including the type. I'm just going to hide those, hide. And now I'm left with the 27 that have not transferred. So what you can do in your master file is actually add them in. They're new animals potentially, or they're retags. So add those EIDs in, and then we can just copy and paste. Copy and paste the records that go against them. So now I know all that information from my session is in my master file, and then you can do some sleuthing about who those animals are. Are they new animals that have just come into the system, or are they retags that you need to chase down who they are to actually match them up with their original data? So there's my little tutorial on how to use the VLOOKUP formula to transfer new information into your master file. I hope that was helpful. Thanks very much.